"Daddy, you need to come home. She's taking everything." The terrified whisper of an 8-year-old girl echoed through the crackling prison phone line. Dominic hadn't heard his daughter's voice in 3 years. In that single, chilling moment, the most feared man in Chicago decided his sentence was officially over. The Rossi estate sat like a fortress on the edge of Lake Michigan, surrounded by high wrought-iron gates and guarded by men in tailored suits. To the outside world, it was a monument to Dominic Rossi's legitimate shipping empire. To the underworld, it was the Iron Throne of Chicago's most ruthless syndicate. But to 8-year-old Mia, it had become a gilded cage since her father went away. Dominic had taken a federal plea deal 3 years ago. It was a calculated sacrifice. Do 5 years in a minimum security facility to protect his family and insulate his most loyal captains from a sprawling RICO indictment. He left his empire and, more importantly, his daughter, in the care of 2 people he trusted with his life: his beautiful fiancée, Valerie, and his underboss, Caleb. For the first year, things had been normal. Valerie played the role of the devoted stepmother-to-be, but slowly the warmth faded. The visits to the prison stopped. The phone calls became brief and forced, and the estate filled with strange faces, late-night parties, and a suffocating atmosphere of secrecy. Mia was a quiet, observant child. She had her father's piercing dark eyes and his uncanny ability to blend into the shadows. On a stormy Tuesday evening, when she was supposed to be asleep, the heavy rumble of thunder masked the sound of her footsteps as she crept down the sweeping mahogany staircase. She was thirsty, but the kitchen was located just past her father's private study, a room Valerie had strictly forbidden anyone from entering. As Mia tiptoed past the heavy oak doors, she noticed they were slightly ajar. A sliver of warm, golden light spilled onto the marble hallway. "The offshore accounts will be completely drained by Friday," a man's voice said. It was Caleb, the man who had once carried Mia on his shoulders at the summer barbecues, the man who had sworn a blood oath to her father. "And the local properties?" A woman's voice replied, smooth and venomous. "Valerie. Liquidated through the shell companies. The buyers don't ask questions when the price is 20% below market value." Caleb answered, the clinking of ice against crystal echoing in the quiet room. "We'll have $45 million untraceable dollars sitting in the Caymans. We take the private jet on Saturday." Mia held her breath, pressing her small back against the cold wall. "What about the kid?" Valerie's voice dripped with irritation. "I am not dragging Dominic's brat to the islands. She's too much of a liability. We leave her with the nanny," Caleb said dismissively. "By the time Dominic figures out what happened, we'll be ghosts. And just to make sure he never comes looking for us, I've arranged a little anonymous tip for the FBI regarding the docks. They'll find the unregistered shipments. Dominic's 5-year sentence will turn into 50. He'll die in that cell." Tears welled up in Mia's eyes, panic gripping her small chest. They were stealing from her daddy. They were going to leave him in a cage forever. She had to warn him. She remembered something. Caleb always left his secondary burner phone, the one he used to coordinate with the outside security detail on the marble island in the kitchen when he was drinking. Moving with the stealth of a ghost, Mia slipped into the kitchen. The phone was exactly where she hoped it would be. She grabbed it, her tiny hands shaking, and retreated into the dark, walk-in pantry, sliding behind a row of heavy flour sacks. She didn't know the prison's number, but she knew the one number her father had made her memorize before he left. "If you are ever in trouble, Mia, and I mean real trouble, you call this number. Uncle Salvatore will answer." She punched in the digits. It rang twice. "Yeah?" A gruff, gravelly voice answered. "Uncle Sal?" Mia whispered, a sob threatening to break through. "It's Mia." Silence hung heavily on the line for a second. Then, Salvatore's voice softened, but an undercurrent of alarm spiked through it. "Little bird, Why are you calling on this line? What's wrong? You have to tell Daddy, she choked out, wiping her nose with her sleeve. Valerie and Caleb. They are stealing all his money. They are running away on Saturday to an island. And they are going to tell the police about the docks. So Daddy never comes home. There was a dead, terrifying silence on the other end. Mia, Salvatore said, his voice now dangerously calm. Where are you right now? In the pantry. They are in the study drinking. Put the phone exactly where you found it. Go back to bed. Lock your door. And do not tell a soul you made this call. Do you understand me, little bird? Do exactly as I say. Is Daddy coming home? She whimpered. Your daddy is going to handle everything. Just be brave. 30 minutes later, 300 miles away in a federal correctional facility, a guard knocked on the door of Dominic Rossi's private cell. The guard looked nervous. He handed a heavily modified cell phone through the bars. Sir, it's Salvatore. He says it's a code red. Dominic took the phone. He was a man carved from granite, with a sharp jawline and cold, calculating eyes. He had spent 3 years reading, working out, and patiently waiting out his time. Speak, Dominic commanded. He listened. The temperature in the cell seemed to plummet as Salvatore relayed every word of Mia's panicked call. Dominic's expression didn't change, but his knuckles turned white as he gripped the phone. The woman he was going to marry. The man he called a brother. They had plotted to steal his life's work, abandon his child, and bury him in federal concrete. Sal. Dominic's voice was a low, terrifying rumble, devoid of any humanity. Yes, boss. Call the warden. Tell him I am cashing in the favor he owes me from the union dispute. I need a ghost transport out of this facility tonight. Falsify a solitary confinement transfer. On paper, I disappear into the hole for 30 days. And when you get back to Chicago, boss? Dominic hung up the phone. He stood up, looking at the small framed picture of Mia on his metal desk. The beast that he had kept dormant for 3 years was awake, and it was starving. The rain lashed against the windshield of the black SUV parked in the shadows of an abandoned warehouse district in the south side of Chicago. The city skyline loomed in the distance, a jagged silhouette of neon and glass. The back door of the SUV opened, and Dominic Rossi stepped inside, water dripping from the brim of his dark wool coat. He looked leaner, harder, and infinitely more dangerous than the man who had left the city 3 years prior. Salvatore was sitting in the driver's seat. The older man, graying at the temples with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow, turned and offered a curt nod. There were no emotional reunions. The air in the vehicle was thick with lethal intent. Welcome back, boss, Salvatore said, handing a thick manila folder over the center console. Dominic didn't reply. He opened the folder, switching on the dim overhead reading light. Inside were bank statements, wire transfer logs, and surveillance photos. Mia was right, Salvatore reported, his voice grim. Caleb has been slowly liquidating the non-essential businesses for the last 6 months, pushing the cash through the laundry fronts and washing it clean into a Cayman shell company registered under Valerie's maiden name. 45 million. The final transfer is scheduled to clear at 9:00 a.m. on Friday. Dominic stared at a photograph of Valerie and Caleb sitting at a high-end restaurant, their hands intertwined across the table. His chest felt hollow, replaced by a cold, burning furnace of rage. Caleb had taken a bullet in the shoulder for him during the Columbus Avenue shootout 5 years ago. Valerie had stood by his father's grave and sworn she would protect Mia with her life. The betrayal is one thing, Sal, Dominic said softly, his voice barely rising above the rhythmic thumping of the wipers. But they planned to leave Mia behind. They planned to cage me like an animal while they spent my money on white sand beaches. What's the play, Dominic? I have 6 loyal men on standby. We can hit the estate tonight, kick in the doors, and drag them out into the mud. No, Dominic snapped. Mia is in that house. If Caleb gets spooked, he'll use her as leverage. He knows how I operate. And he knows the only thing in this world that can stop me is a gun to my daughter's head. We do this silently. We don't just kill them. We take back what is mine. And we let them realize the depth of their mistake before the lights go out. For the next 2 days, Dominic became a phantom in his own city. He didn't return to any of his known safe houses. He operated out of a damp, windowless basement beneath Salvatore's mechanic shop. Using Salvatore's network, Dominic hacked into the security mainframe of his own estate. He spent hours watching the security feeds. He watched Valerie berating the household staff. He watched Caleb sitting at Dominic's desk, drinking his rare scotch, giving orders to Dominic's capos. But mostly, he watched Mia. His heart ached as he saw his little girl eating dinner alone in the massive dining room, a tiny figure drowning in isolation, while Valerie and Caleb entertained guests in the parlor. He saw Mia looking out the window, waiting for a savior she wasn't sure was coming. "I'm here, little bird," Dominic thought. His jaw clenched tight enough to crack his teeth. "Daddy is here." Thursday night arrived. The night before the final wire transfer was set to clear. The night before they planned to flee. Valerie was throwing a farewell charity gala at the estate, a masquerade to mask their impending disappearance. The mansion was ablaze with light, filled with the city's elite, politicians, and the upper crust of the syndicate, most of whom were entirely oblivious to the coup taking place. Dominic and Salvatore sat in a surveillance van parked 3 blocks away, tapping into the external cameras. The rain had cleared, leaving a thick, clinging fog rolling off the lake. Caleb doubled the external perimeter guards, Salvatore noted, pointing at the monitor. "He's got men with automatic weapons walking the tree line. He's paranoid. He knows the final transfer leaves a digital footprint. He should be paranoid," Dominic said, pulling a sleek, suppressed 9mm pistol from his shoulder holster and checking the chamber. But he made one critical error, which is, he thinks he knows the security grid. "But I built that house, Sal. I paid the architects to include a blind spot that isn't on any blueprint." Dominic stripped off his heavy coat, revealing a tactical black turtleneck and combat trousers. He secured a combat knife to his thigh and slid a spare magazine into his belt. "You're going in alone?" Salvatore asked, a hint of concern in his rough voice. "There are 30 armed men on that property. 30 men whose paychecks are signed by me," Dominic replied, his eyes cold and flat. "If they step in my way, they die. But the primary objective is Mia. You wait by the extraction point at the north gate. When I have her, I'll radio. Once she is safe in this van." Dominic paused, a terrifying, predatory smile crossing his face. "Then I go back inside, and I show Caleb and Valerie why they should have just put a bullet in my head when they had the chance." Dominic slipped out the back of the van, melting instantly into the fog. He moved through the affluent neighborhood like a shadow, avoiding the streetlights, his mind hyper-focused. He reached the high stone wall at the rear of the Rossi estate. Caleb had placed guards every 50 yards, but Dominic knew the patrol timing down to the second. He waited, blending into the dark trunk of an old oak tree. A guard walked past, humming quietly, cigarette smoke trailing behind him. The moment the guard turned the corner, Dominic scaled the wall with silent, brutal efficiency. He dropped onto the wet grass of his own backyard. The faint sound of classical music and clinking glasses drifted from the grand ballroom, where Valerie was playing the perfect hostess. Dominic bypassed the main entrances, moving steadily toward the old greenhouse attached to the east wing. Beneath a rusted iron grate hidden under a tangle of ivy was a maintenance tunnel designed specifically for emergency evacuations, known only to Dominic and the man who dug it. He lifted the grate, slipping into the darkness below his own home. The air was damp and smelled of earth. He navigated the narrow tunnel by memory, arriving at a reinforced steel hatch that led directly into a false wall in the basement wine cellar. He pushed the hatch open, stepping onto the imported Italian tile. Above him, he could hear the muffled footsteps of the party. He was inside. Dominic checked his watch. 10:45 p.m. Mia's bedtime was strictly 9:00 p.m. She would be in her room on the 3rd floor. Between the cellar and his daughter lay 3 floors of heavily guarded territory, occupied by traitors and a woman who was actively plotting his demise. He pulled the suppressed pistol from its holster. The ghost had returned to haunt his own house, and he was about to bring the walls crashing down. The wine cellar was a cavern of climate-controlled silence. Thick with the scent of oak and aging cork, Dominic moved past racks of vintage Chateau Margaux and imported Barolo, his footsteps completely swallowed by the heavy stone floor. Above him, the faint, rhythmic thumping of bass from the masquerade ball vibrated through the ceiling. Valerie had spared no expense, his expense to throw the social event of the season. He navigated the dark corridors of the basement until he reached the service staircase. This was the spine of the Rossi estate, a narrow passage designed for the household staff to move invisibly between the floors. He slowly opened the heavy fire door. The coast was clear. Dominic ascended. By the time he reached the 2nd floor landing, the muffled sounds of the party had turned into a distinct murmur of laughter and clinking crystal. He cracked the door open just a fraction of an inch. A burly man in a tailored suit, an earpiece coiled behind his ear, was standing at the end of the hallway. Dominic recognized him immediately. Donovan, a mid-level enforcer who used to fetch Dominic's coffee. Now, he was guarding the very woman trying to bury him. Dominic didn't hesitate. He slipped out of the stairwell, crossing the thick Persian rug with the lethal grace of a hunting panther. Donovan turned at the last second, his eyes widening in sheer terror as he registered the face of his supposedly imprisoned boss. He reached for his shoulder holster, but he was far too slow. Dominic's left hand clamped viciously over Donovan's mouth, cutting off any shout, while his right arm hooked under the man's chin, locking into a flawless, inescapable sleeper hold. Donovan thrashed, his heavy boots kicking desperately against the floorboards, but Dominic held him with iron strength. Within 6 seconds, Donovan's eyes rolled back, and his body went limp. Dominic lowered the unconscious guard gently to the floor, dragging him into an adjacent linen closet and locking the door. He continued upward to the 3rd floor. The atmosphere here was entirely different. It was desolate, cold, and utterly detached from the opulent party raging downstairs. This was where they had isolated Mia. At the end of the long hallway, a single guard stood outside the heavy oak door of Mia's bedroom. It was Garrett. A notoriously jumpy ex-mercenary Caleb had hired off the books. Garrett was smoking a cigarette, blowing the smoke casually toward the vaulted ceiling, completely oblivious to his impending doom. Dominic unholstered his suppressed 9mm. He didn't have time for a wrestling match, nor did he want to risk Garrett getting a shot off near his daughter's room. Dominic stepped out of the shadows and raised the weapon. "Garrett," Dominic whispered, his voice slicing through the quiet hallway like a razor. The mercenary spun around, dropping his cigarette. Before his hand could even brush the grip of his weapon, Dominic closed the distance and drove the heavy steel butt of the pistol brutally into Garrett's temple. The man crumpled instantly, out cold, before his knees hit the carpet. Dominic stepped over him, his heart suddenly hammering against his ribs. He gripped the brass handle of the bedroom door, turned it slowly, and pushed it open. The room was bathed in the soft, blue glow of a crescent moon nightlight. It was messy, filled with discarded toys and half-finished coloring books. On the far side of the room, curled into a tight ball beneath a thick duvet, was a tiny figure. Dominic crossed the room, dropping to one knee beside the bed. He reached out, his calloused, battle-scarred hand gently brushing a lock of dark hair from the sleeping girl's forehead. "Mia," he breathed, his voice cracking for the first time in 3 years. Her large, dark eyes fluttered open. For a second, she looked confused, still caught in the haze of sleep. Then, recognition sparked. Her eyes went wide, filling with a mixture of disbelief and overwhelming relief. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I'm here, little bird." Dominic choked out, pulling her into his chest. Mia buried her face in his neck, her tiny hands gripping his black turtleneck like a lifeline. She was sobbing quietly, her small body shaking with years of suppressed fear. "They said, you were never coming back. They said you didn't want me anymore." A fresh wave of murderous rage washed over Dominic, but he forced his voice to remain calm and soothing. "They lied. I will always come back for you. But right now, I need you to be my brave girl. We are playing a game of hide and seek, and we need to win." Mia nodded against his shoulder, wiping her tears furiously. She didn't ask questions. She simply slipped on her sneakers, trusting her father implicitly. Dominic picked her up, carrying her with one arm, while keeping his weapon drawn in his right hand. He retraced his steps, moving silently past Garrett's unconscious body and descending the servants' staircase all the way back to the wine cellar. He opened the false wall and carried his daughter into the cold, damp maintenance tunnel. When they emerged into the foggy night air near the north gate, Salvatore was waiting. The older man practically ripped the heavy iron gate open, his eyes softening as he saw the little girl. "Uncle Sal," Mia gasped, reaching out for him. Salvatore took her gently, wrapping her in a heavy fleece blanket he had kept warm in the van. "I got you, little bird. You're safe now." Dominic looked at his oldest friend, the rain beginning to mist over his dark hair. "Take her to the safe house on Halsted Street. Put 4 men on the door. No one gets in or out, unless it's me." "Understood, boss," Salvatore said, bucking Mia into the back seat. He looked back at Dominic, noting the cold, dead look in the Mafia boss's eyes. "Are you taking the tunnel back out when you're done?" Dominic turned around, looking back at the sprawling, brightly lit mansion. The sound of the masquerade ball was drifting through the fog. "No," Dominic said, his voice flat and devoid of mercy. "When I walk out of that house tonight, I'll be walking out the front door." Dominic didn't use the tunnel to return. He walked around to the east wing, scaling the lattice trellis that led up to his own private master suite balcony. He shattered the glass pane of the French doors with the hilt of his combat knife, the sound completely masked by a crash of thunder rolling across Lake Michigan. He stepped into his bedroom. It smelled distinctly of Valerie's expensive perfume, a sickening reminder of the betrayal. He moved to the walk-in closet, passing Caleb's tailored suits that had arrogantly replaced his own. In the very back, hidden behind a false panel, was a biometric safe. Dominic pressed his thumb to the scanner. It clicked open. Inside sat a pristine, custom-tailored Brioni tuxedo, a spare Rolex Daytona, and a polished mahogany box containing a solid black Venetian masquerade mask. Dominic stripped off his tactical gear. Within minutes, he transformed from a shadow-stalking ghost into the undisputed king of the Chicago Syndicate. He slipped the black mask over his face, obscuring his features but amplifying the piercing intensity of his dark eyes. He walked out of the master suite and descended the grand mahogany staircase in plain sight. The ballroom was a sea of silk, velvet, and feathers. A string quartet was playing a lively Vivaldi piece in the corner. Dominic moved through the crowd, like a shark gliding through a school of oblivious fish. He spotted Valerie immediately. She was wearing a stunning emerald green silk gown, adorned with a diamond necklace that Dominic had bought for her in Paris. She was laughing brightly, clinging to the arm of Mayor Bradley Hayes, playing the tragic but resilient fiancé perfectly. Dominic didn't approach her. He wasn't interested in a public spectacle. He wanted them in their element. He wanted them where they felt the most powerful. He bypassed the ballroom and walked directly toward his private study, the room where they had sealed his fate. The heavy oak doors were closed. 2 guards stood outside, but they were deeply engrossed in a conversation about the recent football game. "Excuse me, gentlemen," Dominic said, his voice smooth and disguised behind the mask. "Valerie requested I bring some vintage scotch to the study." The guards, assuming he was one of the wealthy, eccentric guests, barely glanced at him and opened the doors. Dominic stepped inside and quietly pushed the doors shut behind him, engaging the heavy brass deadbolt with a soft click. The study was dimly lit by a roaring fire in the massive stone hearth. Caleb was sitting behind Dominic's desk, his desk staring intently at a glowing laptop screen. Valerie entered through a side door connecting to the parlor just a moment later, sighing in exhaustion. "I can't take much more of these politicians," Valerie groaned, rubbing her temples. "Is it done, Caleb? Is the money transferred? The jet is fueled and waiting at O'Hare." Caleb cracked his knuckles, a smug, greedy smile spreading across his face. "Just logging into Bancorp International now. Apex Holdings is ready to receive the wire. 45 million, completely washed. Hitting execute transfer. In 3, 2, 1. Caleb pressed the enter key. Both of them stared at the screen, waiting for the green confirmation checkmark. Instead, a flashing red dialog box appeared on the screen. "Error. Routing number invalid. Account balance. $0. Caleb frowned, clicking the mouse frantically. "What the hell? It says the primary holding account is completely empty." "What do you mean it's empty?" Valerie snapped, her voice losing its polished smoothness, pitching into a shrill panic. "Check the backup ledgers. Did you type the Swift code wrong?" "I didn't type it wrong," Caleb shouted, sweat suddenly beading on his forehead. "The money is gone. Someone bypassed the firewall and drained the entire syndicate reserve. Looking for this?" A deep, resonant voice echoed from the corner of the room. Valerie screamed, jumping back against the bookshelf. Caleb scrambled, reaching frantically for the silver revolver resting on the desk. Dominic stepped out from the shadows of the wingback chair, tossing a black, encrypted USB drive onto the center of the mahogany desk. It clattered loudly against the wood. Slowly, deliberately, Dominic reached up and pulled the black Venetian mask from his face, dropping it onto the floor. The color drained from Valerie's face so fast she looked like a corpse. Her knees buckled, and she grabbed the edge of the sofa to keep from collapsing. Caleb froze, his hand hovering inches from the revolver. His jaw hung open, his eyes wide with a paralyzing primal terror. "Dominic." Caleb choked out, his voice a barely audible squeak. You're in federal lockup." "I was," Dominic said softly, his voice echoing with the dangerous calm of a bomb ticking its final seconds. He slowly unbuttoned his tuxedo jacket, revealing the suppressed 9mm tucked into his waistband, though he didn't draw it. "But the food was terrible, and I heard you were throwing a party in my house. Dom, baby." "Listen to me," Valerie stammered, tears instantly welling in her eyes as she tried to switch back to her manipulative charm. She took a trembling step forward. "It wasn't my idea. He forced me. Caleb said if I didn't help him steal the money, he would hurt Mia." Dominic didn't even blink. He kept his cold gaze fixed on Caleb. "Did you really think, after 15 years of building this empire, I would leave $45 million in liquid assets completely vulnerable without a dead man's switch?" Caleb swallowed hard, his hands slowly inching closer to the gun. "Don't do it, Caleb," Dominic warned, his voice dropping an octave. "You're fast, but you're not that fast. Where is the money, Dom?" Caleb growled, his fear suddenly giving way to cornered desperation. "I had attorney William Keller trigger the contingency protocol 24 hours ago," Dominic explained, walking slowly toward the desk. "The moment you tried to move the funds to your dummy corporation, Zurich International Fiduciary intercepted the wire. Every single penny is now locked in an irrevocable, ironclad trust fund in Geneva. The sole beneficiary is Mia. Valerie let out a hysterical sob. You gave it all to an 8-year-old? I protected my blood. Dominic corrected, finally looking at her. The disgust in his eyes made her flinch. Which is more than I can say for you. You're a dead man anyway, Dom. Caleb spat, his fingers finally brushing the grip of the revolver. I sent the anonymous tip to Special Agent Kenner. The feds are raiding the southern docks as we speak. They'll find the unregistered shipments. You're going back to prison for the rest of your life. Dominic let out a low, dark chuckle that sent shivers down Valerie's spine. I know you called Kenner, Dominic said, stopping just out of arm's reach of the desk. But you see, Caleb, a real boss handles his own problems. I had Sal's hacker, Leo Harding, reroute your little tip. The FBI didn't go to the docks tonight. Dominic checked his Rolex. Actually, they should be pulling up to the front gates right about now. Right on cue, the wail of dozens of police sirens pierced through the sound of the storm and the muffled classical music, growing deafeningly loud as red and blue lights began to flash against the study windows. What did you do? Caleb panicked, looking at the window and back at Dominic. I gave them a different tip, Dominic said, a cruel, triumphant smile touching his lips. I gave them the digitized ledgers that show your electronic signature authorizing the illegal shipments. I gave them the wire fraud records proving you and Valerie embezzled from legitimate businesses. And, just for good measure, I tipped them off about the unregistered, stolen firearms you have stockpiled in the West Wing. Caleb roared in rage and lunged for the revolver. Dominic was a blur of motion. He drew his 9mm, firing a single suppressed thwip before Caleb could even raise his weapon. The bullet shattered Caleb's right shoulder, the exact same shoulder where he had taken a bullet for Dominic 5 years ago. Caleb screamed, dropping the revolver and collapsing backward into the leather chair, clutching his bleeding arm. Valerie screamed, pressing her hands over her ears, backing into the corner like a trapped rat. Loud banging echoed from the front of the mansion, followed by the booming voice of a federal agent over a bullhorn. FBI. Nobody move. Hands in the air. Dominic stepped over to the desk, picking up the silver revolver and unloading the bullets onto the floor. He looked down at his bleeding, defeated underboss. The difference between you and me, Caleb, Dominic whispered, leaning in close, is that you think like a thief. I think like a king. Enjoy federal prison. I hear the food is terrible. Dominic turned his back on them. He walked over to the false bookcase, pressed a hidden switch, and stepped into the secret passage that would lead him out into the night, back to the only thing that truly mattered. His daughter. The hidden passageway smelled of damp earth and absolute victory. Dominic navigated the pitch-black corridor by memory, the chaotic symphony of the FBI raid echoing faintly above him. He could hear the heavy thud of tactical boots tearing through the mansion, the shattering of glass, and the frantic, overlapping shouts of federal agents securing the perimeter. When he finally pushed open the iron grate at the end of the tunnel, emerging into the foggy woods 1/2 mile from the estate, a sleek black Lincoln Town car was waiting with its engine purring. His most trusted driver, Matteo, stood by the rear door, an umbrella in hand. They took the bait, boss? Matteo asked, his voice a low rumble over the pouring rain. Hook, line and sinker, Dominic replied, sliding into the leather interior. Drive us to Halstead. As the Lincoln pulled away, Dominic rolled down the tinted window just an inch, watching the spectacular downfall of his own empire in the rearview mirror. Through the trees, he saw Special Agent Harrison, a notoriously relentless Fed, leading a handcuffed, weeping Valerie out of the front doors. Her emerald silk gown was soaked and dragged through the mud. Right behind her, paramedics were loading a pale, agonizing Caleb into the back of an ambulance, heavily guarded by armed marshals. Dominic rolled the window up. The beast was finally satisfied. 20 minutes later, they pulled into the alley behind the Halstead Street safe house. Salvatore unlocked the heavy steel door before Dominic even had a chance to knock. The older enforcer looked exhausted, a half-empty glass of bourbon in his hand. "It's all over the police scanners," Salvatore said, leading Dominic into the dimly lit living room. "The feds seized the estate, the shell companies, everything. But Dominic, what about you? You're still a fugitive. When the warden realizes you're not in solitary," Dominic held up a hand, silencing his oldest friend. He walked over to the worn leather sofa where Mia was fast asleep, wrapped tightly in Salvatore's fleece blanket. He knelt beside her, his hardened expression melting into profound peace. "The warden knows exactly where I am, Sal," Dominic said softly. Salvatore frowned, setting his glass down. "What are you talking about? You didn't really think I broke out of a federal penitentiary on a whim, did you?" Dominic stood up, turning to face his underboss. "When Mia called me, I knew I couldn't just escape. If I ran, I'd be looking over my shoulder for the rest of my life. Mia would never have a normal childhood. So, I made a phone call to Federal Prosecutor Rachel Davies at the DOJ. Salvatore's eyes widened in sheer disbelief. "You made a deal with the feds. I gave them the Holy Grail," Dominic stated, his voice devoid of regret. "I handed over the encrypted offshore routing numbers for the entire East Coast Commission. I gave them the politicians on the payroll, the Port Authority bribes, and the judges in our pocket. I burned the whole underworld to the ground. But why didn't they raid the estate months ago? Because I needed Caleb and Valerie caught red-handed committing international wire fraud, and I needed them to locate the stolen weapons Cash Caleb was hiding," Dominic explained, pouring himself a drink. "The DOJ sanctioned my release. The ghost transport was an FBI tactical insertion. They allowed me 24 hours to secure my daughter and trigger the financial trap before they moved in." Salvatore fell back into an armchair, running a hand over his face. "So, the 45 million in Geneva is completely legitimate," Dominic finished, taking a sip of the bourbon. "Cleared by the federal government as part of my asset retention agreement. I traded the syndicate's secrets for absolute immunity and clean identities for me and Mia." A soft groan came from the sofa. Mia rubbed her eyes, sitting up slowly. She looked at Dominic, her face breaking into a radiant, sleepy smile. "You came back," she whispered. "I told you I would, little bird," Dominic said, scooping her up into his arms. He held her tight, breathing in the scent of her hair, the weight of the last 3 years finally lifting from his shoulders. "We won the game of hide and seek. Are we going home now?" she asked, resting her chin on his shoulder. Dominic looked around the dusty safe house, then out the reinforced window toward the dark, wet streets of Chicago. He had ruled this concrete jungle with an iron fist, building a legacy soaked in blood and betrayal. But as he held his daughter, he realized his greatest victory wasn't conquering the city. It was walking away from it. "No, sweetheart," Dominic smiled, his eyes shining with a rare, genuine light. "We are going somewhere much better. Somewhere with an ocean." 6 months later, the Chicago syndicate was nothing but a memory, dismantled by federal indictments and infighting. Far away, on a sun-drenched terrace overlooking the Amalfi Coast, a man named David sat reading a book, sipping espresso. Down by the water, a little girl named Maya chased seagulls along the pristine white sand, her laughter carrying on the salty breeze. The king had surrendered his crown, but he had finally found his paradise. Did your jaw drop at that final twist? Family loyalty always wins in the end, and nobody outsmarts a king protecting his princess. If you loved this intense Mafia redemption story, hit that like button. Share this video with your friends who love a good thriller, and subscribe to our channel for more gripping, real-life-inspired dramas. Leave a comment below on what Dominic should do next.